Hey, welcome back to the big picture of the Bible. In our last lesson, we saw how David, a man after God's own heart, was very patient. He had to wait 15 years before he got the kingdom, and he refused to kill Saul or do anything against the Lord's will. But now, David is king, and he will unite the kingdom. This kingdom is the greatest kingdom and will be the greatest kingdom the earth has ever seen. There was a big problem in Israel. You have 12 tribes, and how are you going to unite those tribes? God gave great unifying principles to his people, but no matter what those principles were, and no matter what those laws were, it was really going to take people who had a heart for God to make those laws work, for those principles to come forward. And so God made a promise that one day he would give them a king, and this king would be different because he would be a picture of what he wanted in everybody, a man after God's own heart. And that was David. And so in our last lesson, coming into this lesson, we saw that Saul died, and David, who had a heart for God, came to the Lord and said to the Lord, Lord, is it at this time you want me to go up and be the king? God said, yes. Where do you want me to go? He said, Hebron. And so now David is in this capital city, and they had a civil war because the servants of Saul, they wanted to keep the descendants of Saul on the throne, and they were fighting to do that. And David was fighting them over this. But David would do the fighting according to the will of God. And finally, he won the battles, and this is how all of the people were united under David at Hebron. In 2 Samuel 5, 1 through 5, it says this, Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, now listen to this, it's really important. Behold, we are your bone and your flesh. Previously, when Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel out and in. And the Lord said to you, you will shepherd my people, Israel, and you will be a ruler over Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them before the Lord at Hebron. Then they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years. At Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. And in Jerusalem, he reigned 33 years over all Israel and Judah. Now, I want you to make sure that you understand what you just heard, because this is very important. God said that he would unite all of the kingdom under a theocratic king, okay, whom the Lord had chosen. But he would be a shepherd. What kind of king do you want? You want a king who is a shepherd, the shepherd of Israel. Do you hear the Messiah in this? Do you hear the pictures that Jesus is going to come? And who is Jesus? Jesus was the shepherd of Israel. So David is a type of Christ. He's the first man who is a type of the kind of king that we want on the earth. And David shepherded his people. Now, this is what's interesting about the passage. Up to this time, Saul and all the people in his kingdom were rebelling against David. Can you imagine that? They're rebelling, even though they knew God was using David to lead them in and out. He was the best guy for the job. He was the one who was doing right. And they finally confessed and recognized, you're the one. You are the one. You're the one doing this. And so as we go through the passages of Scripture today, I want you to pay attention that David is a role model. As a matter of fact, there are 928 times in the Bible that talk about David. I read every one of them. And I want you to know that 99% of the times God talks about David is positive. This guy is the man. And today, you know, we talk about who is the GOAT, the greatest of all time. This guy, until Jesus comes, is the greatest of all time. He's the greatest king. And when you hear the promises that come out of this king and this kingdom, it ought to just make your heart grow fonder and fonder and greater for the Lord your God. So let's talk about how is David a role model. In 2 Samuel 8, verses 14 and 15, it says this: David put garrisons in Edom. In all Edom he put garrisons, and all the Edomites became servants of David. And the Lord, listen, the Lord helped David wherever he went. So David reigned over all of Israel, and David administered justice and righteousness for all his people. Do you hear that? What kind of role model was? He put down his enemies, and even his enemies were serving him. And then for all of Israel, see, he shepherded them. He administered what we need, justice and righteousness. The kingdom that's coming on the earth in the future from Jesus is a kingdom of justice and righteousness. Why? Because the throne of our God is a throne of righteousness. And God gives us a righteousness that is a righteousness from him as a gift. And here David is demonstrating that to all people. He is this picture of all of this, justice and righteousness. This root word, justice, mishpat, means to decide a case, an ordinance, a law. And Psalms 1 talks about how blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord. And in his law he meditates day and night, and he will be like a tree firmly planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in its season. Its leaf does not wither, and whatever he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so. They are like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. Did you hear that? Judgment, righteous, justice, righteousness. This goes all over the Bible. And so God is going to picture for us this great picture that we need a righteousness. What? What kind of righteousness? Not a righteousness of our own. From the very beginning, God wanted a righteousness on the earth, his righteousness. And he would give it to you as a gift. Genesis 15:6 says that Abraham believed God and it was accounted to him as righteousness. And this is key. In 1 Kings 5:5, I want you to hear how important this is all the way through the kingdom of David. And for us, and we are in the kingdom of the second David, Jesus, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the Son of David. Listen to what it says here. It says, because David did what was right in the sight of the Lord, and had not turned aside from anything that he commanded him all the days of his life, except in the case of Uriah the Hittite. Did you get that? Well, I'd love for God to describe my life that way. Joe, you did right in my sight all the days of your life except this one time. And think about what God is saying about this man, David. What a great man. It's not that he wasn't a sinner. We talked about that the last time. But look at God's testimony about David. This is why 99% of the verses are positive about him. Because God wants you to have a righteousness which comes from God. That's what David's demonstrating. David got his righteousness from God. And so let me read it again. It's so important. Because David did what was right in the sight of the Lord, and he did not turn aside from anything that he commanded all the days of his life, except in the case of Uriah the Hittite. And that's when he took Bathsheba and had Uriah killed, the husband of Bathsheba. It was a horrible sin, not demeaning how horrible that sin was. But David was a man after God's own heart because he repented even of that. And so now, as I go through the rest of these scriptures, I want you to pay attention how great this man is, how God uses him as the great man you need to look up to. And it will get us into the New Testament, and you will see how important this is. In 1 Kings 15, 1 through 4, it says this. Now in the 18th year of King Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, Abijam became king over Judah. He reigned 3 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Abishalom. He walked in all the sins of his father, which he had committed before him, and his heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord his God, like the heart of his father David. But for David's sake, the Lord his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem to raise up his son after him and to establish Jerusalem. You see, after David, then there was a king, Solomon. And after Solomon, there was a civil war. And all the kings that went to the north with Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, all 20 of them were bad. And God said they walked in the ways of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. And they did evil in the sight of the Lord. And so now God was going to begin to describe all of the evil kings would be like Jeroboam. But guess what? All the good kings, God would begin to describe them by David. Everybody would be judged against David. Now, if David is to just be thrown out because of what happened with David and Bathsheba, God would have never done this. But every king, everybody is going to be judged by David and what kind of kingdom that he had. And listen to, so here is Abijam comes along. He's acting like the kings of Israel. He's like Jeroboam. And God said, no. He didn't act like David. And he should have acted like David. And so let's talk about some of these kings. 1 Kings 15:11. Asa did what was right in the sight of the Lord, like David his father. So in the kingdom of Judah, in the southern kingdom, you have all of these good kings, and all the good kings are described the same way. They're described as men who followed after their father David. Now Asa is all the way down the line. I mean, it's Solomon, and then it's Rehoboam, and then a few others, and then you got the Asa. And it says that Asa followed after the ways of David. And then in 2 Chronicles 17:3-4, it says this: the Lord was with Jehoshaphat because he followed the example of his father David, his earlier days, and did not seek the Baals. But he sought the God of his father, followed his commandments, and did not act as Israel did. So Jehoshaphat comes along, and he's a great king. And you know, this is what happened. There was a king in Israel, and Jehoshaphat wanted to help him. And when he went to help him, the king that was in Israel wanted to go to war. And he had all these prophets of Baal come before him, all false prophets. And Jehoshaphat turned to him and said, isn't there just one prophet of the Lord here? Because he could tell the difference. And this king said, yeah, there's one, his name's Micaiah, but I hate him. And so Micaiah came in and he prophesied. And Jehoshaphat wanted the Lord's will, not this Israelite king, Ahaz. He didn't want him. He didn't want what he wanted. He wanted what God wanted. And that's what distinguishes a good king from a bad king. Do you want what the Lord wants, or do you want what you want? That's the big thing. And so jump down to 2 Chronicles 21:4-7. And we have a king named Jehoram. And he comes and he defies all the things from all the kings in the past. And he's going to act wickedly. Listen to how wicked this is. It says, now when Jehoram had taken over the kingdom of his father, made himself secure, he killed all his brothers with the sword. And some of the rulers of Israel also. Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king. He reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, just as the house of Ahab did. And Ahab's daughter was his wife. He did evil in the sight of the Lord. Yet the Lord was not willing to destroy the house of David because of the covenant which he made with David. And since he had promised to give a lamp to him and his sons forever. This is really important because Jehoram wanted to be like the northern kings, the evil kings like Jeroboam, like Ahab, and all of these evil kings. But yet he was in the south. And God was protecting the southern kingdom. Why? Because of his promises to David. This is the house of David. And if you're going to be a king in the house of David, you better act like David. And so God judged Jehoram. And I jumped down to 2 kings, and I want to just contrast them for you. One is Ahaz and one is Hezekiah. And so in 2 Chronicles 28:1, it said, Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He did not do right in the sight of the Lord as David his father had done. Once again, a king related. So Uzziah was a very good king. Then Jotham was a very good king. And Jotham's son Ahaz turned on his father and grandfather and decided, I'm not going to be a good king. I'm going to follow the ways of the evil kings. And I'm going to do what's evil. And what he did blows me away. God came to him out of grace, mercy. Oh, wow. What God did with him is he sent Isaiah to him, and he said, Ahaz, ask me anything you want. Make it as high as heaven. Low as, or it doesn't matter. Ask whatever you want, I'll do it for you. I was like, rub the genie. Rub the lamp. The genie says, you got 3 wishes. You ask Eddie whatever you want. And God comes to Ahaz and says, you can ask me whatever you want. And you know what Ahaz does? He says, no, I'm not asking. He was so arrogant and proud. And he didn't want God at all. So God said, oh, you don't want to ask for a sign? I'll give you a sign. You know what my sign is? The virgin will be with child, and you shall name him Emmanuel. Look at that. The one who wouldn't follow David, yeah, you're going to get a greater David. His name is going to be God with us, Jesus Christ. Whoa. And so not asking for, I just can't imagine if you had a heart for God and God came to you and just was going to give you the greatest gift to prove to the king that he could be trusted. And this king, Ahaz, no trust. But he had a son, and his son's name was Hezekiah. And I'm excited about this because even in Israel, they found Hezekiah's signet ring. Can you imagine that? This guy's real. This is alive. This guy really lived. These people really lived. This is true history. And this is what it says about Hezekiah. In 2 Chronicles 29:1-2, it says, Hezekiah became king when he was 25 years old, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Abishai, the daughter of Zechariah. He did right in the sight of the Lord according to all that his father David had done. I hope you're getting the point that I'm trying to make here. If David was so bad because of the sins of Bathsheba and Uriah, God would never have chosen for all this. But that's what Satan tries to get people to believe. No, this is the greatest king, the greatest kingdom ever. This man did more good, more faithful things for the Lord than any king. He was amazing what he did. And God used him for awesome things. And then every king is related to him. And I get to the New Testament, and I open it up, and I look at Matthew 1. It says, Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Do you see how great this man David is? Because there's a kingdom coming, and that kingdom is going to rule all of the earth. In my next video, I'm going to bring up the Davidic covenant. Why is it so great? What made David so great? I'm going to tell you why. Because the New Testament tells us where people go wrong. When people go wrong is because they seek a righteousness their own, not the righteousness which comes from God. David was blessed to have not only the righteousness of God, but an eternal covenant laid over him by God himself. God was going to speak over him an unconditional covenant, which is going to give you light and make a kingdom so great that it will cover the whole earth. It's an amazing kingdom. I hope you come back and come and see what that kingdom is going to be like. If God has used this in your life, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and share this with other people. Thank you very much.